We invited a number of former AIFC staff, that includes Nurganum and also Ardak. And as you know, Ardak is now with the PPP Center, and obviously we will continue to collaborate together with the PPP Center, because obviously the PPP Center is of importance not only for Kazakhstan but also for the AIFC and its development. Well, on the slide here, and I don't know whether you can see my mouse, I actually have put all the credentials I have that are relevant for corporate governance, and there's a reason for it. And there's also a reason why we choose to work together with what was previously called ICSA, Institute for Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, and what is now called the Chartered Governance Institute. So first of all, what does FCG mean? That means Fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute. So I'm a fellow there already, and we will be primarily talking about that one. And in a minute, I will contrast them to the other qualifications as well. CDIR and FIOD is Chartered Director and Fellow of the IOD. That's another body in the United Kingdom that is also operating under Royal Charter. And then the final one is NACT Governance Fellow, and NACD stands for the National Association of Corporate Directors. There's actually the American counterpart of the IOD. So obviously, the NACT focuses on corporate governance as we see it in not North America, but in the US only. And there we have a rules-based approach to corporate governance. The IOD focuses primarily on, well, actually really only on the United Kingdom. But what is interesting with the Chartered Governance Institute, that it is truly international. That's number one. So it has various subsidiaries around the world that are typically in the Commonwealth. And as you know, the Commonwealth, there was a time that the sun would never set on the British Empire. So for example, Canada is part of the Commonwealth, but also Singapore, Australia, even South Africa. And all these countries use a principles-based approach. That doesn't mean that the codes are the same, but in the curriculum of the IOD, not the IOD, of the Chartered Governance Institute, they look at best practices, not only applicable to the United Kingdom, but really applicable to a broad number of countries. That's number one. Number two is that the Chartered Governance Institute caters both for two types of professionals. First of all, is actually company secretaries. And the qualification leads to a charter secretary. Number two is, they also cater for board members. And they provide the chartered governance professional. So for example, in my case, I have both designations as a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The journey that we have followed at the BCPD in order to become an official training partner took actually more than a year. So there was a rigorous vetting process because they wanted to make sure that we would be able to provide the quality training, but also that we abide to the highest standards, not only of corporate governance, but also of ethics. So what I will talk now about is how we at the BCPD will actually roll out corporate governance training and qualifying programs, what that means for you. And also we will talk about the cost picture and the next steps. And I'm looking at my chat box, nothing so far. So if there's any questions or comments, please use the chat box. First of all, I wanted to give you a very brief overview of how corporate governance has actually evolved over several decades, starting in the early 1980s. And here I'm really looking at corporate governance the new era of corporate governance. Obviously, corporate governance did not start in 1980s. It started actually a long time before. In the US, actually more than 100 years ago. In the United Kingdom, similarly. But if we talk about, let's say, the new era of corporate governance, it really started in the United States in the 1980s. And I'll refer to this as defensive-driven governance. And the reason for that is that there were a lot of hostile takeovers. So these were takeovers that were unwanted from the owner, shareholders of an existing business. And out of that came actually anti-takeover charter amendments, or called ATCAs. And the focus was really on fending off potential hostile takeovers. Most corporate governance actually has been rather reactive, but we now may be venturing into a more proactive era. But when I talk about the reactive era, was corporate governance 2.0 and 3.0. The 1990s was really focused on compliance-driven corporate governance, and that was following a number of corporate scandals. I cite a few here, but there were many more. It was not just in the US and the United Kingdom. They were also in the Netherlands. There were also the case in places like Italy with Parmalat and so on. So there's a question here: what's a hostile takeover? It's basically when a company waits for your stock, but it's unwanted, in order to take control of your company. So, and this can be contrasted against friendly takeovers, where basically both parties get together in order to either have an acquisition or a merger. And but hostile takeovers were really driven by private equity firms, and they really wanted to get control of the company, and they tried to actually make a quick buck in something like 6 to 12 months, restructure the company, then sell off its shares again. The focus was not really on long-term value creation, it was really on the shorter term. So that was a question that actually came in from Arman. When you ask your questions, please share them with everybody. I think it's better than just privately. So, but coming back to corporate governance 2.0, in the United States, we then saw a legislation, which is Sarbanes-Oxley, after two senators, Sarbanes and Oxley, one on each side of the aisle, one a Democrat and the other one a Republican. And in the United Kingdom, of course, the Cadbury report. The late Sir Cadbury, you may have heard of him, actually really started the whole movement after the corporate scandals. And Maxwell, obviously, here is one that actually took place in the United Kingdom. The focus was really here on preventing fraudulent failure. So failure because of not proper behavior by company directors. Whether that's a non-executive director or an executive director, doesn't matter, because in the law, they're actually both considered as company directors. And then what happened, yet another external shock, and that was the global financial economic crisis. And there we had, again, a reactive response in the US, Dodd-Frank, again named after the two senators that put the legislation together. And then in the United Kingdom, the Walker Report. And the Walker Report is an interesting one, because the Walker Report focused actually on the financial services sector. After all, the global financial economic crisis was made in the financial services sector, and affected largely only the financial services sector. The Walker Report came up with a very interesting recommendation, and that is that the audit committee should look at risk, but obviously the audit committee has typically a backward-looking view on risk, where actually the recommendation was to have a separate risk committee, and that risk committee should be looking at the future. where could potential risks emerge that could affect the corporate landscape. And as a result, I refer to this as foresight-driven governance. And other countries have increasingly adopted that as well. We obviously have a major risk that affects us all, which is actually COVID-19. But there are other risks on the horizon as well. And then the question is, how can we potentially identify those and try to see how they would affect the business, but also how they would, how we would be able to, the board collectively, mitigate against them. Why is this important? Because we see increasingly a shift from what is called compliance-driven governance to actually the focus on both conformance, compliance, that is, and performance. And when we later look at the curriculum of ICSA, the Chartered Governance Institute, there is not much focus on compliance. There is, of course, a focus on compliance, but there is much more of focus on actually performance of the business within a certain confines. And those, of course, are the legal confines. And then finally, and this is really still emerging, and interestingly, both the United States and the United Kingdom are not necessarily spearheading this. It's basically other Commonwealth countries like South Africa with the King IV report, but also Singapore, and then the Netherlands with the Dutch Code, that actually are increasingly integrating ESG requirements, sustainability requirements, as part of corporate governance codes. So this is a trend that will probably not go away. It's much more proactive than what we saw in the past, which was largely reactive. Now, why am I saying all of this? Because obviously the curriculum that we selected, the partner with whom we would work together, it needs to be a curriculum that it's aligned with the era in which we operate. Also, as you all know, our mission statement is to contribute to the sustainable economic development of Kazakhstan and the region. So sustainability is part of that. And as a result, we wanted to have a corporate governance code or principles that we have developed previously, but also an educational partner that actually would be aligned with that underlying philosophy. And we believe that with ICSA, the Chartered Governance Institute, we actually have found that partner. So, but what is corporate governance really about? And that's the last slide I'm going to talk about in terms of corporate governance and how it evolved. As you all know, we have an ethics code. That ethics code is now official, so it has to be used, and we have to abide by its code. Now, we also have corporate governance principles that we have developed. And we wanted to make sure when we were developing the principles that there would be no conflict between the code and the principles. Now, you're going to say, well, why would there be a conflict? Given that the tenets of corporate governance are transparency, accountability, and property. And property means honesty. Well, sometimes, very often, it's in between the lines. So we wanted to make sure that both the code and the ethics code, that is, and the corporate governance principles are actually aligned in their underlying philosophy. So what next? The training that we're going to be providing through the BCPD. And there's a broad spectrum, and then I will zoom in onto three, and that is initially the fast track, but also other ways in order to become a chartered governance professional. So let me start with one. And this is actually already something which is ongoing. Actually, it will be delivered this week and next week. So we're working together with the IOD and with an individual, and the individual is Simon Osborne. Simon used to be the chief executive until about a year ago of the Charter Governance Institute. And Simon has been involved in the development of our principles as well. So Simon will be delivering on the 14th and the 15th, if my memory is correct, but it's not next week, but the week afterwards, 2 modules on, for 2 cohorts within the AIFC, the value of good governance. And you probably have received an invitation for that already. Leadership for directors will be developed or delivered by another Simon, Simon Haslam, Professor Simon Haslam, who is actually with the IOD. And that will be 2 two-day modules delivered next week, 7th and 8th respectively, and then 8th and 9th, 9th and 10th for a different cohort. So in 2 weeks from now, the first part at least, or no, the first iteration of that will have been delivered. Number 2 here, what we have is actually a governance leadership program. And this will lead to our own certification offered through the BCPD. Own certification, it implies actually a full week program, 5 days, followed by an interview, and also followed by an examination for that, and it will lead to a governance leadership certification. We will be working, and we are working with both ICSA and the IOD on delivering this as well. For your information, we recently have won a bid with one of the BioTirect subsidiaries where we will be providing training as part of the governance leadership program. Let me go to 4, because then afterwards I will only talk about the Charter Governance Professional qualification, or what is very often referred to as designation. So webinars and conferences. We have a program together in order to deliver webinars and conferences, not only to the AIFC community, but also increasingly reach out to outside of the AIFC. I refer to BioTirect, and actually there is a big demand in the market for proper corporate governance training, but also to engage them throughout the year through webinars and conferences. We already had several webinars, including one at the Academy of Law on the AIFC corporate governance principles. We will repeat that at the end of this year, and also conferences. For example, at the Astana Finance Days, we had a panel on corporate governance. On that panel was Simon Osborne, Simon Haslam, so many of our stakeholders here, Carl George, George Littlejohn, who you probably all know, and also the late Barbara Judge, who unfortunately passed away a couple of days ago from pancreatic cancer at the young age of 73. So we will continue to engage our community within, but also outside of the AIFC, to promote sound corporate governance principles through webinars, conferences, short training programs, but also qualifying programs. And the next slide I'm going to skip because I already spoke about it. But you will get the slide deck as well, so we will have it distributed to all of you. So what is the Charter Governance Institute all about? Well, first of all, it's a qualifying membership body. And for those who don't know what that exactly means, is that a qualifying membership body has received a royal charter. And as a result, it can actually provide a charter designation. In this case, 2, and one is Chartered Secretary, and the other one is Chartered Governance Professional. There are about 30 chartered institutes in the United Kingdom. CISI, for example, who is a partner of us, Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments. ACCA, the accounting bodies, are all chartered institutes. So a chartered designation or being or having received a royal charter is only for obviously chartered professional bodies, but also for universities. And that means that they can award qualifications. We will later discuss at what level this qualification actually positioned itself, depending on the various models. In terms of history, actually, it's one of the oldest chartered institutes in the United Kingdom. So it was created in 1881. It received its royal charter in 1902. So that's more than 100 years ago. But importantly, and that's here at the bottom, in 2019, the name was changed to Chartered Governance Institute because they wanted to cater for both corporate secretaries and governance professionals. So a little bit about the history here and the importance of the corporate secretary. So initially, the focus was solely on training, developing corporate secretaries, and actually providing them with a body of knowledge, but also there's an ethics component of it. There's an interview that is part of that as well. And the reason for that is that the corporate secretary, although not formally part of the board, plays actually a critical role, a very critical role, in fact, in terms of corporate governance. Just for your information, the average compensation for a corporate secretary of a FTSE 100 is in excess of £350,000 sterling. So that's a significant compensation for what very often people confuse as an administrative role. It is not. The corporate secretary, together with the chairman and the chief executive, defines the agenda and the calendar for the board. That's number one. Number two is the corporate secretary is the go-to person for everybody within the organization that is in an executive role, but also for especially the non-executive directors when there's certain issues about a potential conflict of with reference to their duties, but also when there are certain ethical issues, when there's certain legal issues, professional development issues, and so on. So the corporate secretary is actually a key role. However, there's a perception that it's a secretary. And as a result, that it is not a very valuable role. Let me give you a small anecdote about being a secretary, not a corporate secretary, but being a secretary. When I was at McKinsey, this was in 1998, I was in Singapore. I was working on an acquisition. It was not a merger. And I was working with a partner in New York, Tim Coller. He's still there, by the way. And so when you work on an acquisition, time is of the essence. Everything needs to be concluded in roughly, let's say, 3 weeks' time. So as a result, I had very frequent interactions with Tim. So one day I called him up, and Tim was not around. And he said, and a lady answered the phone. She said, "Well, I'm his executive assistant." And I said, "Well, you can tell me what this is all about." And he said, "I'm very sorry. This is my evil Belgian that came up." And I said, "Well, no, I need to speak to his secretary." And on the other hand, on the other side of the phone, said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Well, it's because if I would know you would be his secretary, I know you would be able to keep a secret. Because secretary comes from the Latin word secret. In other words, you can hold a secret. You're the confidant of the board. And in this case, of course, of a senior partner at McKinsey." Bam, the phone was hung up. She was not happy about that. But interestingly, a week later, when I had her again on the phone, she answered the phone and said, "I am Tim Collers. secretary. I looked at my phone, couldn't believe my eyes. And think about, well, the United Nations, who is in charge? It's actually someone who has, as part of his title, secretary. So secretary actually comes with a certain level of panache, and we should not underestimate that. But at the same time, because of that perception in the market, they also wanted to have a dual designation. And this is where actually the chartered governance professional comes in. So that basically as a chartered governance professional, you would also be serving on boards, not be only a chartered secretary. So that's a little bit the history behind it, and also the value of a qualifying program. Now, the program itself has two parts. And now I'm going over, assuming that you would start, let's say, at the age of 23, 24, when you have a university degree, but you don't have an accounting or a legal degree, and you have to go through the entire program. So the first module is corporate governance. By the way, each of these modules require about 200 hours of study. And corporate governance is one of the modules that we will start delivering in March of next year. Number two is a company compliance and administration. That module used to be called company secretarial practice. So this is really about the practice of the corporate secretary. Number three is about interpreting financial and accounting information. It's both looking backwards, but also they look at merger and acquisitions. They look at things like, well, are you going to issue shares, the cost of capital, but also are we going to raise debt? Are we going to pay out dividends? Are we going to buy back shares? All those things are integrated as part of the curriculum that is interpreting financial and accounting information. So it's not just interpreting the three statements, but it's also looking at forward-looking finance and the effect it has on the value of the company. Then the fourth module, which leads to what is called affiliate membership, CG, is company law. And this is the only legal module that is part of the whole qualifying program. And obviously it focuses on company law. If you would have to start from level 1, this would take you about 800 hours of study and preparation. It's at level 6, and level 6 is considered to be the last year of undergraduate level, if you would compare it to university. And as I said, each module is 200 hours of study. Now, the next level then is, if you are successful in the first level, the next level is that you can move to become a graduate membership, grad CG, as a designation. Then it's at the master level, level 7, and again each module will be about 200 hours of preparation and study. The module there that you will start with is risk management. This is actually not quantitative at all. So it's not comparable to, for example, the FRM designation, financial risk manager, that is part of the GARP, the Global Association of Risk Professionals. It's about risk management and the way that boards deal with understanding risks, but also how they would manage them, mitigate, or even accept. At the BCPD, for example, we have developed we did a risk mapping exercise. Recently, we have updated it because of COVID-19. And actually, we were very happy we did that exercise because I think we're in a much better position in order to manage and mitigate these risks than if we would not have done risk management properly. 6 is development of strategy. Obviously, if you look at what is corporate governance all about, it's about contributing to the long-term success of the company. So obviously you need to have a strong financial position today, but also you need to take certain risks in order to develop the business going forward. And this is actually where we start integrating many of the previous aspects that you have seen in previous modules, but really looking at forward creating options to grow the business sustainably. And then finally, board dynamics. As the chair, you're one among equals on the board. And that's very often not understood, that you're one of equals on the board. You're not the boss of the board as the chair. You need to have a proper balance in the board as well between independent and executive directors. And even among the non-executive directors, some may not be independent. And there are requirements for the various committees also, how many independent directors with certain experience, like for example, finance experience, would be on a certain committee, for example, the audit committee. But here it's really about the dynamics in the boardroom, avoid things like power groupings, making sure that board members can discharge their duties. There are no conflicts of interest. If conflicts of interest emerge, that basically those are being addressed, or that directors abstain from voting and those types of things. So it's much more in the human psychology leadership sphere that board dynamics curriculum has been developed. So if you would have to start from the very beginning, you would have to go through 7 modules that will take you about 3.5 years to complete, and about 1,400 hours of study. A note on the exams: none of the exams are multiple choice. They're essay-driven exams based on small case studies that are quite analytical in nature, where you have to leverage what you have seen in the various modules. There's 1 exam for each of the modules. Once you have completed all the modules, or the modules that are required given your standing, you also can apply in order to become a FCG fellow with the Charter Governance Institute. And there you will have a 2-hour interview with 2 FCGs that are going to not test you on knowledge, but basically on your experience, but also primarily on your ethics and behavior. So, and that's why this is such an important qualification. On the one hand, you have a kind of a stamp on your forehead that says, this individual knows a lot about corporate governance. Otherwise, you would not have been successful through the 7 exams. On the other hand, there's another stamp on your forehead, and they basically said, this is a person you can actually trust. So you can actually trust as a fiduciary for your company. And that's actually very powerful when you would be looking at a position as a corporate secretary or as a member of the board. So those are the 7 modules, and this is the entire curriculum. But let me now show you what the staircase to heaven is. So you start with, let's assume that you don't have an accounting qualification, you don't have a legal qualification, but let's say that you studied, well, what can I use here to make sure that I'm in conflict of what I'm going to say later on. Let's say you studied languages or psychology, for example. When you study languages or psychology, you obviously get a good degree, but you're not going to have any exemptions, no exemptions whatsoever. So what you do then, you have to take the first 4 modules of the qualifying program. That leads to affiliate membership, or what's called CG. That will typically take 2 years. Then number 2 is here at the bottom, is complete advanced modules. So those are 3 modules, and those actually lead to graduate membership or grad CG. The level 2 would actually take an additional 1.5 years. So 1 and 2 combined, we're talking about 3.5 years. And again, assuming that you have to start from the very beginning. Number 3 here is when you have a minimum of 6 years of relevant experience, you can actually apply. It's a simple application. You just have to demonstrate that you have that experience, and you become an associate member. And then you can use ACG behind your name. Now, number 4 is that you need more experience. It's actually 8 years of relevant experience. And then the question is, what is relevant experience? Relevant experience is not working in a restaurant and serving people. It needs to be a professional experience. It could be an accountant. It could be a lawyer, it could be a corporate secretary. It could be a manager in a business. But obviously, it has to be a business-related activity. Obviously, when you're young, you're not going to be very often in a leadership position. You're not going to have a director title or anything like that, but that doesn't matter. You don't need that. The relevant experience does not require that. When you have the 8 years, you can apply to become a FCG or Fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute. And then also you get with that 2 professional designations. And you see my own certification here. And as you can see, I'm a fellow, but also I'm a chartered governance professional and a chartered secretary. I tend to use now for me, chartered governance professional. But if you would be a corporate secretary, you may initially let people know that you are not only a fellow, but also a chartered secretary. On the other hand, if you would be interested to become a member of the board, you may actually more promote that you are a chartered governance professional as opposed to a chartered secretary. The good thing is you will actually have both, and you can choose which one to use. But in any case, you will be a fellow of the institute. Now, what's a typical module look like, and how we're going to provide training through the BCPD? And for those that have not heard about our new strategy that we developed over the summer, is that we have 3 pillars plus something. And that's something I don't want to downplay because it's very important. It's quant, and it's really looking at the skills that are going to be required to effectively compete in the 4th industrial revolution. But if we look at our 3 other pillars, we have learn pillar, we have a develop pillar, and we have an achieve pillar. The training here that we're doing as part of ICSA is going to be part of the develop pillar. So we'll have people that are part of the develop pillar that actually will be working with you on this. But, oops, sorry. So we're going to start, the exams, by the way, are organized in May and in November. The suggestion is to take 1 exam in each period. These exams are 3 hours long. They're pretty intensive. And as a result, the recommendation is not to take more than 1 exam, especially if you're a working professional. If you would be a student, that may be a different matter. But of course, if you're a full-time student, that basically means you do not acquire at the same time experience that will count towards your designation either. So this is an example of a curriculum we have put together that is for corporate governance. One of the modules, actually module number 1. And this one is fully aligned, first of all, with the handbook. There are handbooks available from ICSA that are both in print form and in digital form. Each handbook is about 400 pages on average. It's a combination of text, case studies, dilemmas, and references to other learning materials. In principle, the handbook is sufficient, but the recommendation is to have additional training. And what we want to do is in March of next year, we want for the fast track candidates and also for other candidates, because it's the first module, to start with corporate governance module. And we envision currently to have it over an intensive 5-day module, where actually 2 days are during the weekend and 3 days are during the week. And the objective here is to lose as little as possible time that you will otherwise work. And as a result, the number of days off from work are limited. 3 days here, and then another 3 days at the end of the year as well. This module will primarily focus on 5 areas: corporate governance principles and issues, the board of directors and leadership, disclosures and reporting requirements, risk management and internal control, and then also corporate governance systems and control issues. I will be teaching this module, but I will also invite guest speakers from ICSA, including Simon Osborne. What we want to do is also, just before the exam, 1 week before the exam, we want to organize a review session. And we thought that based on discussions with ICSA, that it would be good to have about 4 to 5 week study period in between the intensive 5-day classroom and the review session. If COVID-19 permits, we will do it in person in classroom. Otherwise, we will use Zoom or Teams, and potentially we will use a hybrid model so that some people actually may not be able to attend, where others actually will be in the physical classroom. And again, this depends on whether the environment is deemed safe to do so. Pathways, and I guess this is probably the most interesting to you, because you obviously, if possible, you don't want to start with module 1. So let me start from the bottom. So entry options. Let's assume you have no degree. You have a high school diploma, but you have no degree, which is obviously not your case, because otherwise you would not be employed at the AIFC. So you would have to take an additional module, module number 8, or actually module number 0, and that module is Foundation Program Entry. Success in that module gives you automatic access to the qualifying program that leads to a chartered designation. Another entry option is depending on the qualification you already have. I referred before to, let's say, a psychology degree or a degree in literature, and that would give you no exemptions. So you have to start from 1. But if you have a finance, law, or MBA degree, then certain exemptions will apply. So, for example, if you have an MBA degree, it is very likely that you will have at least 3 exemptions. For accounting, for strategy, and potentially also for leadership. So, so there will be exemptions. If you have a finance qualification or a law qualification, but you're not a qualified lawyer nor a chartered accountant, but it's a degree, a university degree, you probably have at least 2 exemptions, probably more. So what does that mean is that you would have to send in your transcripts. They will be looking at your transcript. They will maybe even ask what was behind a particular course or a module. And so maybe the syllabus they may ask for, unless it's an accredited school in the United Kingdom. That makes it very easy in order to make a proper assessment. And then they will say, well, you can start at level 1 still, but you have an exemption for 1, 2, and 3, for example. Now, it really becomes interesting once we're in the green bar here, qualified lawyer or chartered accountant. So when we talk about chartered accountant, what do we mean, or what does ICSA mean? It's a chartered accountant of one of the UK bodies, not just British, but UK bodies. So that includes, I believe, Wales has its own designation, but also Ireland and definitely Scotland. And of course, the three designations that exist in Britain, which are ACCA, which are ICAEW, and CIMA. Actually would that would be part of the yellowish bar, ochreish bar over here. But if you're a qualified lawyer, that means an LLB degree plus you're associated with your local bar, that's very important, then actually you, depending on the number of years of experience, you either have to take 5 modules, professional entry, or only 2 modules. So in the case that your professional entry, you're exempt from 2 modules, depending on the qualification. Obviously, if you're an accountant, you're not going to be taking accounting. And if you're a lawyer, obviously, you're not going to be taking business law. If you are a fast-track candidate, that means you have any of these plus 5 years of experience, you only have to take corporate governance and risk management, and you're done. You're not yet at FCG. Let me go back to, you're at that time, you have completed 2. So you're grad CG. If you have sufficient experience, which by that time you should have, because plus 5 years, it takes about a year to study for the qualification, you would also have the designation ACG. And if you have even 2 more years experience, then you have to apply. And again, it's a simple application, but in addition, you have the interview, the qualifying interview, and then you can call yourself a fellow and any of the 2 designations. So depending on your qualification and your level of experience, the entry for studying is different. And I'm happy to discuss them with you individually if need be, but also people should check with ICSA directly. So, but let's talk about fees. It's always important to talk about fees. And so there are 2 parts here. One is actually the fees that go to ICSA. And there are actually 4 components of it. So first of all is the registration. That's a one-off. You pay that once, you never have to pay it again. Number 2 is student membership. So registration is £79. Student membership is 138. Module fees are 160 per module. And study texts are 45 per module as well. Once you are registered for a module, you also have access to the VLE. That means mock exams and so on. But also particular materials that complement the study text. If you go for the fast track, 2 modules, the cost with ICSA will be £627. So for £627 and tuition through the BCPD, you could actually become a chartered governance professional and a fellow of the Institute as well. In addition, well, if you are a professional track, so 5 modules, which will take you about 2.5 years, the cost to ICSA will be 1,242 based on the current fee structure. Please note, and you see that at the bottom of the slide here, that in the case of Kazakhstan, they're reduced fee countries. And that basically means that it's roughly half the cost if you would be a Brit, or in my case, from Belgium. So if you would be interested in studying for this, but you're not from a reduced fee country, you will have to pay a higher fee, almost roughly double the amount that you have over here. Then if we look at part 1 entry, 7 modules, we're talking about 1,652 pounds sterling, again, based on the current fees. As I showed before, we want to provide tuition through the BCPD. And for a single module, the cost is 175,000 tenge. Obviously, we price that in tenge because of the local currency. Fast track then turns into 350. Professional track in a little bit less than 900. And part 1 entry into a little over 1.2 million tenge. Now, if we add everything up, we're talking about between less than 1,000 if you would be fast track, and that's pounds sterling, to just 4,000 pounds sterling if you would be a part 1 entry. So if you think about it, that it actually it's a qualification in its own right, conferred on the Royal Charter for 4,000 pounds is actually, and at the master level, it is far from expensive. And what we see is actually increasingly a trend in the United Kingdom that certain students for certain qualifications decide not to go to university or combine university with a professional qualification and even working and then doing it over a period like something like 6 to 7 years. And at the end of the road, not only they get a professional qualification, they get a degree, but also experience. And at a lower cost than otherwise having to enroll at a university. I'm not arguing against universities, but everybody has to think about what is the best module for their professional development going forward. How long does it take? Between 1 and 3.5 years, depending on your status. And the final slide that I have is next steps. If you would consider becoming a chartered secretary or chartered governance professional. First question is, are you a lawyer? That's number 1. And if you're a lawyer, you have to make sure that you're registered with the Kazakhstan Bar Association. And what we are thinking about doing is actually put all those who have a law degree, an LLB degree, and they are not necessarily registered with the Bar Association, that basically we create a small group and actually we look together at how to get you registered. Is there anybody on the call who is already registered with the Bar Association in Kazakhstan? Is there anybody? I see Taljibek. Well, Taljibek, if you have a microphone, please tell us and share it with others what it took for you in order to be registered with the Bar Association. What's the process? And Gohar, I see here as well. So, and Nurganum too, which is great. So let's hear from all 3 of you. And maybe, and Ida is great. So that's actually very, very positive. So maybe you can also help others to become registered with the Kazakh Bar Association. Taljibek, why don't you start?
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is a very useful initiative. Well, I became a member of Kazbar when I was working with EY in legal, and at that time it was not that difficult. But I know that after the amendments to the legislation, they changed the requirements, and now you have to pass test, some special test. And previously it was only a recommendation from the current Kazbar members and legal degree.
But you got it before, right? This is Ida speaking, I guess, right? Is that Ida?
This is Taljibek still.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So, who has done it more recently among the participants who have registration with the Kazakh Bar Association? Who has done it after the requirements have been changed? Nobody?
I did it. Sorry, I was trying to turn on my microphone. Hello to everyone. Yeah, I did it like just recently because I was planning to apply to this program. I was so eager, so I applied to the bar, and I got it like not a month, like couple of weeks ago. Confirmation that admitted to the bar. It's quite easy. That the one test which is like takes like the first and the second course of LLB. The second step, it's just they look at your document and they check whether you actually got your degree, and that's it. So it's quite fast.
Gohar, if people have questions, could they come to you? Because, well, you went through it on the new format. So as a result, I think that your experience is more relevant than Taljibek. Because Taljibek obviously has the registration from before.
Yes, absolutely. Would love to help.
Thank you very much. How long did it take you?
Frankly speaking, it takes like 2 or 3 weeks because the commission, the commission is like once or twice a week, and you spend like 1 hour for exam or 45 minutes for exam. So it's almost nothing from time.
So in other words, if there would be anybody else who is a lawyer, but not yet registered with the Kazakh Bar Association, they could easily complete this by the end of the year, right? Do you understand that well? Great. So thank you very much, all of you. So if you're a lawyer, first of all, and if you're not registered with the Kazakh Bar Association, please do that. Gohar is obviously has done that recently, and she is available to assist you in the right direction. Then, if you have more than 5 years of experience, apply for the fast track entry. 2 modules only. Right? So, how many years of experience do you have, Gohar?
I have more than 5, so I hopefully I will be eligible for fast track and just pass the exams.
Well, and Nurganum has also more than 5 years, so so that basically means Nurganum and Gohar are already would be eligible for the fast track. You still have to apply with ICSA, okay? So, and it will take some time, but but if you meet these eligibility criteria, it will be granted. And in other words, 2 modules only. If you don't have yet 5 years of experience, you have to go for a professional entry. And what does that mean is actually 5 modules. So I get often questions then, let's say I have 4 years of experience. What do I do? Do I wait a year and only have to take 2 modules? Or do I go for the 5 modules? And my suggestion is, and I'm not sure I should be saying this, is that basically I would, in that case, I would wait a year, but I would use that year very well. I may actually buy the books, for example, of some modules that I say, yes, I'm a lawyer by training, so I don't need to look into the business law curriculum, but I may want to beef up my skills in terms of strategy and in terms of, let's say, interpreting financial and accounting information. And you study that on your own, you use that year well, and then you apply, and you get fast track. So only 2 modules as opposed to 5, but you use your time well, it would then take you a little bit longer. Please keep us informed at the BCPD. So you register your interest so that basically we can also help you with your application if need be, but also we can then also contact you with reference to the training. So that's if you're a lawyer, that's the next steps to take. If you're a chartered accountant, and again, it's a UK professional body, it's not just British, then you don't have to do anything else except checking whether you have enough experience or not. So are there any chartered accountants on the call here that are currently present? ACCA is the most popular program in Kazakhstan, and we have quite a few at the AIFC, but also in general, a few hundred even in Kazakhstan. So that would obviously appeal to them. or apply to them. And then the question is, do you have more or less than 5 years? And then it's the same comments that I made before. So let's say you have 4 years of experience. Do you apply now? Or do you say, well, obviously I'm not going to take finance or accounting courses, but maybe you want to take a legal course if you have not seen that as part of your qualification. You probably have seen strategy as part of your qualification, so you may not have to focus on that. Again, please register your interest with us. And then the third option is, and that's why I really wanted to talk to a broad group of people, not just those that would go for fast track, because you may see for yourself a potential career, not just as a corporate secretary, but also to serve on the board. And to serve on the board is not a badge of honor. It actually comes with very, very serious responsibility. In the United Kingdom, for example, you have 7 duties. You could be disbarred. Well, it's not called disbarred, but actually they could take away your ability to serve on the board with company house, and up to 17 years, or potentially even for life. So you want to take your duties very seriously, and that's why we suggest that if you want to serve on a board, that actually you go to some form of qualification. So you have to check your status with the Charter Governance Institute. It's on a case-by-case basis. And let me go back over here to this slide. So it really depends on where you are in this graph here. But even if you're over here, let's say you have an MBA, it could be that someone with an MBA from a particular school with a particular concentration has 2 exemptions. Someone else from another school with a different concentration could have 4 exemptions. And we at the BCPD don't decide that. That's truly up to ICSA to decide that. So going back to the last slide here. So you have to check your status with the Charter Governance Institute. And again, if you want to email them, feel free to email me too, to copy me in the email. I would be, they know me, well, I'm a fellow, but also I was part of the negotiations together with my colleagues at the BCPD to broker that we would become a certified training provider. So, and I can provide you with the contact details of people as well. Apply for entry in the qualifying program, and then of course, still registering. The link to their website is over here. But obviously, we remain available to provide you with any questions that you may have. So we still have some time left, actually about 25 minutes. We had some level of interactivity, but obviously, I'm sure you have other questions. So how can I help clarifying certain things, please? Nobody.
Hello,
right.
Alexander.
Yes.
Professor,
Hi.
do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Who is this, please?
This is Aida.
Aida. Hi, Eddie. Aida.
Hi, I have one question in relation to the requirement to be registered with the Kazakhstan Bar Association. As you know, there are other legal chambers in Kazakhstan, for example, Eustace. So I would like to change my registration from Kazbar to Eustace. So is it a requirement to be registered only in Kazakhstan Bar Association, or I can be registered in other chamber? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. You need to check the details with ICSA. But for example, let's say that you have studied abroad, let's say in the United Kingdom, or in the US, and you have an LLB. Well, in the US, they don't have an LLB, it's a JD there, but the JD is considered as the equivalent of an LLB. And then you would be, let's say, in in the US, you would be registered with the New York bar. Would that qualify you? The answer is yes. You don't have to actually work today in New York for as long as you're registered with an appropriate bar. But I would ask the question directly to ICSA. So I would explain my situation. I would say, I have an LLB degree from this university. I'm currently registered with this bar. Is this acceptable, or do I have to change it to another bar association in Kazakhstan?
Okay, this is good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. They will be very responsive. With COVID-19, people don't commute to work as often, so they are they're very quick in terms of responding. And again, please copy me. Please copy me in your email, and my email, and use also your AIFC email.
Okay, good.
And if the response doesn't come very quickly, I will actually remind them to address it, but they will answer to you quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues here?
Alexandra, I have a question. So do we need to apply with ICSA before March next year, so that we have their reply by the time?
I would apply long before March. I would apply still this year. So that basically, they're going to have a lot of applications. They have on average about, let me think, they have about 2,000 students. So they have to process all these applications, and you don't want your approval to be delayed, because it's only after you have been admitted into the program that you will be able to register for certain modules. And then you can buy books. I actually, I'm pretty sure you can buy all the books right now. I'm 100% sure you can buy all the books right now. But you won't have access to their VLE, their virtual learning environment. So I would suggest not to postpone it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then maybe once it's approved, actually, you register with ICSA only at the beginning of next year. And that means that the registration fee you will have to pay, but student membership will actually run then from January to December. And then you won't lose any real time, I would say. And you can already start preparing. Then in March, we organize the intensive 1-week module. Then you again study for 4 to 5 weeks. We have the revision day, which we'll organize in a weekend. And then the examination, where you will actually take the examination with ICSA. And by the way, now the examinations are fully online. So you don't have to go to the British Library or the British Council, I believe it's called. You can actually take the exam from the comfort of your home or the office. There's certain requirements, but it's very well doable as long as you have a proper internet connection.
Can I also have who will be the contact point from PCPD?
Is there anybody else from BCPD on the call here still? Asel is on the call, I see. Who would, Asel, you're not with Develop, are you?
No, I'm not in the Develop, but I think Eleonora will be the contact point. But if you're interested,
Eleonora.
Yes, in the training, we ask you to fill in the form that we circulated in our first announcement about the corporate governance training. I will send the link to the chat so you can fill it in if you did not do it.
Super. So you can, Asel and also Eleonora. What's her last name?
Kusimbaeva.
So Eleonora Please type it in the chat box for everybody, Asel. I don't want to misspell her name. So, okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments? I see that a lot of people are still there. That means I see that Steve is here. I see that James is there. So James and Steve want to have FCG behind their name as well. In the case of James, I will strongly suggest to, and Steve too, I will strongly suggest that you have to start from the very beginning, although that may be a difficult call because I believe that James is a chartered accountant. Is that true, James? Are you a chartered accountant?
Partly qualified.
Only partly qualified. Ooh,
yeah, I went to the real life instead. I went real life, forget the academic.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm an old man. I'm an old man. I can't do this 8 years of training.
It's only 3.5 years. But actually, when you say academic, it's truly a compliment, because when people say you're academic, you know what my reply is? I say, well, I'm a professor in a business school. In a business school, we develop those that actually will work in management consulting firms. We also develop the frameworks and tools and models that actually are used in management consulting firms, typically 4 years, that they are developed, and in business actually 10 years. So yes, indeed, as an academic, we do leapfrog, we come up with new ideas, so that are later adopted in the business world. Very true. Thank you for that.
I think, in all seriousness, I think these are exceptionally good ideas, these courses for everybody to do. And I encourage people to do this, because as we move forward nowadays, it's corporate governance is much more important, not only just, you know, in emerging markets world, but these are things that people will be looking for. It will definitely help your careers, and it's definitely worth it from an intellectual and a practical business perspective, to Alexander's point. So these are these will help you in many different ways, not just obviously in the corporate governance.
Indeed. Well, and for example, look at this slide here. You, for example, James and Steve, who obviously you're on the board because you're chief executive of AIFC Business Connect. You're automatically on the board in a unified board. You may say, hey, I don't want to go through these 3.5 years of program, but I'm still interested in actually updating or in the latest developments in corporate governance, and you may want to participate in the governance leadership program. A 5-day intensive program, or you may consider something else, or you may want to participate on a regular basis in the webinars, the conferences. You were there as well when I gave an update at the Academy of Law, and Steve was there too. So, and I think that for people with your profile, I think that would be sufficient. I would not necessarily argue that that you would still have to go through this entire program. But if I look at younger people here, and people that really want to have a career as a corporate secretary and also in corporate governance, then I would really say, hey guys, this is really something for you to consider. And that's why we designed it in the first place. So, and everybody has to look at what is right for me. So for example, Ardak, who's on the call, and I had many discussions with Ardak. He's now the corporate secretary of the PPP Center. He will not maybe remain a corporate secretary for the rest of his life, but you never know, right? So for Ardak, actually, this would make a lot of sense. Same for Gohar, right? Well, Gohar had, and Kulparash, for example. Kulparash, who is with the FinTech Hub. And Kulparash was involved in the development of the AIFC corporate governance principles too. So you really have to think about where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And as a result, what is best for you in terms of training program? But in general, I would say, if you're interested in corporate governance, also remain involved in what actually we're rolling out right now as well. And I'm particularly referring to the corporate secretaries of the 100% owned subsidiaries and also the authority itself. But Gohar, I know that it's not going to be applicable to AFSA, but if you want to be involved in the work we're going to be doing in seeing what applies to, let's say, AIFC Business Connect versus the BCPD, you're very welcome to be involved in that as well.
Professor, I would love to.
Okay. Well, I just sent out an email to other corporate secretaries, Kulparas, for example, who is the corporate secretary of the FinTech Hub, and Ardak is going to work with us as well. I will forward that email to you, and we're going to have another call on Monday, where actually we will discuss the modalities about how we're going to start rolling this out. And even if it's not applicable to you, actually you may find value in being engaged with others. So, and I will send it to you, Gohar, later on. And thank you for your interest. If anybody else is interested, although it's not applicable to them, about the work we're going to do on corporate governance at the AIFC, then please let me know, and I will make sure you're involved. Actually, your input will be highly, highly valued. I'm looking at the chat here. Estelle, thank you very much for posting both the email address of Eleonora, but also the forms. Yes, indeed, do please stay in contact with us. And if nothing else, well, we don't have to use all the time. If nothing else, then have a lovely evening. And Estelle is recording this. It's so if please make sure that everybody has access to the recording. So, and also I will send to Estelle the slides, and the slides can be distributed to anybody at the AIFC. And to Ardak and Nurganum, who I believe you don't have an AIFC email address anymore, excuse me, I will send it to you separately.
Thank you, Professor.
All right, thank you all for attending and staying, and for your good questions. Remember, I have an email address, so, and I'll respond typically very quickly. So let me know, and we'll make this happen together. We're there to assist you in your professional journey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks,
bye-bye. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Raj. Bye-bye.
Bye, James.